All right, here we are with an 8274 Warren winch. And what I want to do in this video is go through some of the electronic things associated with these winches, motors, the solenoids, and that type of stuff. Because what happens is these winches sit for years and um, they don't get a lot of prolonged use, so some electronics will go bad. Or now that these 8274s are becoming very popular again, very desirable, they're highly buildable, highly customizable. People are digging these out of the back 40. They're getting them out of from underneath their shop benches, dusting them off, and they're taking another look at them. Maybe their uncle, aunt gave them something, a truck or another vehicle with one of these winches on there. Maybe they found one cheap at a garage sale. People remember them from the past, and they want to get them up and going again, rebuild them, and use them. And some of the stuff I'm going to go over today with the electronics is some of the common things that will eventually go bad with them, and things to test when it comes to the solenoids or the motors or your switches to determine, what's the first thing to do when it comes to this type of winch and most other winches. If you got a winch that all of a sudden stops working, there's things that you can quickly do to diagnose what the problem is instead of just throwing that winch to the side, buying another cheaper one. Whatever the case is, there's ways to determine, what the component is that has went bad. And 9 times out of 10, a solenoid, a motor, a switch, something like that, is fairly inexpensive to replace rather than replacing the entire winch. So I want to kind of go over those things today. And a lot of this will transfer into other winches, not just the 8274s that I have here. These are my favorites. I build them, customize them, do all sorts of cool stuff with them. So, but like I said, a lot of this stuff is for basic winch knowledge when it comes to diagnosing a problem. Now, what we got, you got your winch, and this is considered, feet forward mounting, high mount. It's an upright type winch. Other winches will be down low. Regardless, some might have plastic covers over the motors, different solenoids, different remotes, and all that sort of stuff. But it all really comes down to the same basic components. You got a motor, and then you have some sort of solenoid setup. Whether it's a single solenoid, which is more modern, most modern winches now have single solenoids, or you have the old style solenoid packs with the 4 solenoids in them. Regardless, there's ways to test all this stuff and diagnose what the problem is before you just, like I said, throw the winch off to the side and get a new one. So with the motor, solenoid, you have bus bars or some sort of cable setup from the solenoid back to the motor. That's pretty standard. And then somewhere in that, you have a remote, which can be, a plug-in style. You have your hardwired plug-in style remote on the cord. Or most winches now have wireless that are coming with them. This is a giggle pin wireless setup. And, the wireless are going to have some sort of transceiver box. And that's either going to be part of the plastic, or inside the plastic housing where your solenoid is, close to that solenoid wired. Or you can mount these someplace else under the hood, out of the mud, keep them warm during the winter. And then you're running your handheld remote to get the rope, cable, whatever you're using in and out. So we're going to start thinking about all this stuff as different switches. And then you can also run, before I do that, you can also run a toggle switch on the dashboard to power all that stuff. It's just the same thing. It's a switch, that's powering your solenoid to power the winch motor. So let's start off our switch thinking. So you have your remote, whether that's a plug-in, whether it's a wireless handheld. This is your first switch. This is your first electrical component. Just think of this as it's a toggle switch. It's a switch. You're switching on and off, in and out to make the winch motor work. Okay? This signal, when you're switching it, you're sending that electronic signal to a transceiver. That's another switch in your line. So boom, there's your first switch. This switch is just taking the wireless signal and it's switching into the hard wires, the solenoid. Your transceiver, whether it's inside a housing next to the solenoid, whether it's remotely mounted under the hood, it's all the same. You have power, you have ground, you have an antenna, and then you have two wires that are in and out. The in and out wires is what switches your solenoid. So here in your solenoid, you have 3 spades. Your solenoid is a third switch. So you got your handheld, your transceiver. Now your solenoid is another switch. It's getting your power from either your plug-in remote or your transceiver wireless, and it's sending power into these spades. You have 3 spades. Middle is always ground. You have your 2 outside spades. Now, I'll use this hand to point. Your outside spades, left and right, in and out. Middle is always ground. So your transceiver box or your plug-in remote is powering your solenoid. Where are you getting the power? Your main power comes into your solenoid from your battery. That's your main power for the solenoid. So your power's in there, it's sitting there, it's waiting to be switched by power being applied to these spades, in or out. Then once that happens, once that solenoid receives that power, does its switching inside, and it's taking your main battery power and then pushing it out, whether this is through cables or the bus bars, to the 3 lugs. You'll see every winch motor has 3 lugs. Sometimes they're in different configurations. Warren motors, giggle pin motors, the Bowtoo's, are the same. You have the 2 back lugs, and then you have 1 lug up front. That makes for a nice, sleek configuration with the bus bars or your cables. So the old style, it's the same thing. There's your plug-in. That's where your power comes in. You have main power from your battery coming in. And this is just a crazy series of 4 different solenoids. You still have power coming in, and then you'll have power in and out coming from your other switch, your plug-in remote. And then that switches different things in here. These things are now obsolete unless you have a period correct show vehicle, or you're just nostalgic and you like the old technology. There really is no reason in today's world to run these when you can replace all of this mess with the single contactor or the single Albright style solenoid. These will sometimes be called solenoids. They'll also be called contactors, or an Albright. Albright is the company that produces the quality ones. Many different versions. You can get them dirt cheap, just like everything else in today's world. There are, stupid cheap options, and then there's better quality options. You got to make that decision on how much you want to spend, what your expectations are out of your winching system. But this, obsolete. I don't like talking about these. I really don't even like them. Every one I get, every winch, this is the first thing I take off and throw in the trash. There are YouTube videos. Other people have done some nice videos on how to test the individual solenoids. Usually, if you have one bad solenoid, you got two. And today's prices, you know, are you going to just replace two and then leave the two old ones? I don't know. I would replace all four. And if you're buying quality worn replacements, you're going to end up paying more for these four than you are a good Albright style solenoid. So like I said, obsolete. But anyways, so we have our our wireless remote switch. Boom. We hit out. That goes to transceiver. That switch is switched. The transceiver sends the power to the out spade on our solenoid, which then transfers that power from your main battery cable through your cables or your bus bars, and it powers the winch. Okay. That's about as basic, you know, as I can explain it. Always use collet cable. 2/0 is what is on the high end for the bigger 8-horse motors and stuff like that. If you're getting into, you know, dual batteries, pushing a lot more power around, you know, 2/0. 1/0 is usually good enough for a winch setup like this, where you still want a lot of juice going to that motor to keep it fed, but you're not running, you know, a crazy dual motor setup, pushing 24 volts and all that sort of stuff. So what do we look at first when, get that spade on there, we're hitting buttons and our winch isn't working. So we're hitting out, we're hitting in on our remote, and whether that's the plug-in style or the wireless, and nothing's happening. Okay. What I recommend, and it's probably the easiest, go straight to the motor first. Normally, you know, you got three things that can go bad: your wireless remote or your plug-in remote, the remote itself, your solenoid, or your motor. You know, you got wiring in there, you got a bunch of other stuff, but that's the three main things to check kind of first, because you can knock this stuff down pretty quick. Go straight to your motor. What you want to do, take your wrench, 1/2 inch, whether this is cables, whether you have the old style solenoid box on there, get that stuff out of the way. Get your cables or your bus bars out of the way. Take them off of those lugs, so you'll have just 3 empty lugs. And you know, what you need to be able to do is get to those lugs, and the same. It's same with all winch motors. You know, you just got to know the different configuration of your winch motor. There are differences. You got to know the 3 lugs, what they're kind of actually doing. But on these style motors and most of the worn stuff, it's pretty simple. The back 2 and the front 2. What you want to do is, with a cable, a set of jumper cables, you're linking 2 of these studs together, powering the other one. I suggest getting a piece of cable with the ends. Put this in your supply boxes, your whatever boxes inside your rig. This, you know, it's nice to have one of these. It's the easiest, fastest way to check to see what's going on with your winch. Basically, you're taking this and you're connecting it to the front lug and then one of the back lugs. You're just jumping those together. And so you're connecting those, you're powering, you're putting your battery power, and that can be done with a set of jumper cables. So to do this with jumper cables, you'd have to have 2 different sets. You have to have one set to do this with, and then the other set to run, you know, your positive from your battery to your other lug here on the motor. So you're jumping these together, you're powering that other lug. The motor should spin. Should spin one way. Now you do the opposite. You power the other, or you connect with your cable. The other two lugs power the non-using one. You know, so you're connecting the other two, powering the other one. So what you're doing is you're connecting one of the back ones to the front, powering the the lone one that's not hooked up, and then you're reversing that. You're powering, or you're connecting the other two, powering the other one, and your motor should work. If your motor doesn't, check your ground. Same thing. Ground's got to be tight. Got to be a good ground. If you're confident with the ground, and you're not able to get that winch to move by that little trick, it's your motor. You can basically stop right there and say, okay, my motor has had it, and then go from there. If the motor spins, everything's good with the motor. Now you got to go to your solenoid setup. Now, all right, here's the top of the motor looking down on it. You have your solenoid over here. You have your bus bars going to the 3 lugs on the winch motor itself. So the best way to test your winch motor is to take your chunk of cable with your ends on it, and what you're going to do is, of course, you're going to take the nuts off of those. You're going to attach this here, one here and one there, and then you're going to power. Let's see if these will stay. So you're going to attach those together, basically jumping those together. Stick that in there so that holds. Of course, you're going to, put those under the nuts so everything's tight. And then you're going to apply power to the other stud. First, you're going to move all this stuff out of the way, whether it's your cables, whether it's your bus bars or whatever it is. Get all that crap out of the way. And jump 2 together, power 1. Now you can draw your main power from right here, undo that. That's coming from your positive on your battery, so that's known good power. Stick it there, or you can use jumper cables. Use the red side, put one on the positive post of your battery. Apply power there, the winch should spin. Now you're just going to test it the other way. You're going to leave this one hooked up here on the right. You're just going to jump the other side. So basically, flip this around. You're going to jump these 2 together. Same thing, under the nuts, tighten everything down so it's tight. And then you're going to apply power to this stud. And the winch motor should spin the other way. If it doesn't, then your motor is bad. Same thing, if it's one of these styles or an Albright style, 9 times out of 10, if you're hitting the remote and you're hearing that audible click, 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 and nothing's happening with the actual winch, it's your motor. Because the clicking is coming from the solenoids. It's showing that they're trying to do something. You can take, a little trick too is to take a hammer, rubber mallet or whatever, and whack that motor a couple times while you're hitting your remote and it's clicking. You might get it to spin. There's dirt that will get inside a winch motor. There's condensation that will cause rust and corrosion. And sometimes you can knock that stuff loose, get your, winch motor periodically working until you can get back and have it serviced, have that motor rebuilt, cleaned up, whatever. If these are clicking, if they're not clicking, and you've tested your motor is good. Now you got to start looking at solenoids. So if these aren't doing anything, well, you got to take this off. You got to individually start checking what's going on here. So normally they'll work one way and not the other. Very rarely will all of them just stop. So you're usually getting one way or the other when these start going bad. It'll power in or power out. So yeah, you can jump on different YouTube videos, start testing these. With the Albright, pretty simple. You got your main power coming in. on your lug, you got your 3 other lugs, going out to the motor lugs. You go right to your 3 spades. Center's ground, the 2 outside are in and out. Pull those off, and now you just need a jumper wire. So we know the motor works, it tested good, and we're not hearing any clicks from the solenoid. Real quick, to make sure it's not the remote, take a jumper wire from your battery. It can be any size, any gauge, 16, 18 gauge, whatever. You could even use, you could still use your jumper cables. Put one on the positive. And all you're going to do is, you still have your power hooked up, so everything's still hooked up like it should work. You're just putting direct power to one of the 2 outside spades. That should be either in or out. Something should happen. Put power to the other one. The reverse should happen. If it does, if you tap those with power with your jumper wire from the battery, or you can even do, you can jump it from your power here as well with a shorter piece of wire. You're just taking known good power from the battery and applying it to those spades one at a time. If you do that and the winch works, then it's your remote. It's either your transceiver or your handheld remote, or if you have a plug-in style, it's somewhere in that wiring. It's somewhere with the switch for your plug-in style remote. But if nothing happens, you apply power there and nothing happens, and the winch is good, the motor is good, apply power here, nothing happens, well then your solenoid's bad. And these, once they go bad, it's usually because they're full of water, they're full of mud, they've been kicked around, something's been bashed, they've been hit by a stick, something like that. Replace it. They're pretty cost effective, long hunting trips, stuff like that, carrying extra just to be sure, but replace it. If you test it and it's good, then like I said, you got to go to your either transceiver or your handheld. Check the batteries in this. You can do that. If you got good batteries, and you're confident with that, well, then you still have your transceiver box. Usually if there's something wrong with the transceiver box, you can take it off and shake it. If you hear it, something in there rattling, then it's blown. That very rarely ever happens, but it does happen. And these need to be protected. You can't have these out in the rain and the mud constantly. They're not that waterproof. They will get moisture inside there, and things will corrode and eventually pop. And same thing. These are fairly cheap remotes. Most all wireless remotes have this same transceiver setup, and you can get the different Warren brand. This is Giggle Pin. You get the crazy cheaper ones off of internet. But it's the same components. So you grab your transceiver, you shake it, it's bad. Well, then you can stop right there. Your handheld isn't going to work. So if you have tested motor, solenoid, it's all good, everything's working, and then you've decided it's your transceiver or even your handheld part that's not working, it's still really easy to power a winch. You're just drawing off your power with the same thing, a 16, 18 gauge wire. You can do it with jumper cables if you want. You're just running off of your main power, off your battery, which is also right here, and you're just making a jumper wire and the ability to put power to one of your 2 outside spades at a time. So you can run a wire back into the cab, hook up a toggle switch. It's a good idea to have that set up anyways as a backup. You can wire your toggle switch, run your wires, and splice right into your wires that are coming from your transceiver into the spades on the solenoid. You just splice into those for your toggle switch. It's the same thing. You're just adding another switch into that system. And, you can still simplify it. It gives you an option to check different things fairly easy, because you can unplug things right here, put a meter on it, put a test light on it, and see where you're getting power and all that. But like I said, the best way is just to run off of your known good power source and, start testing these components and then just backtrack from the motor. Motor's good, solenoid's good, transceiver's good, handheld remote part is good. As soon as you run into something that's not good, well, then there's your problem. And you either got to fix that, replace it, whatever you got to do to keep going. But that's some down and dirty tricks on how to diagnose different issues if your winch stops working, or something happens and you got questions, or you pick up a used winch and you're not sure if it's going to work or what it's going to do. Those are some good ways to kind of diagnose some stuff and get a good idea on where to start replacing, upgrading, or doing anything like that. So I hope that helps everyone. If you got further questions, feel free to get a hold of me. I can run you through this. If you got an old winch, or if your winch stops working or anything like that, get a hold of me. But this gives, keep this video handy, and reference this. Go back and reference this and say, okay, what can I test first? Where do I got to go to find out what's going on with this winch that I've got? So, like I said, I hope that helps you, and we'll see you out on the trails.